The Chargers had a visit with one of the top linebackers in the class on Thursday, which leads some to wonder, what does that mean for Junior Colson?
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers now for 9 seasons, but this is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen. To make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Well, Daniel, the Chargers have met with UCLA linebacker Carson Schwesinger. So that's an interesting position to be, talking about here right now. And it kind of begs the question, what does that mean for Junior Colson and his future with the Chargers? And then we're going to take a look at the draft. Of course, that's coming up in a few weeks. And we're going to talk about some positions that the Chargers should stay away from, at least early on in the draft. And we're also going to talk about the new international pathway program player and why he definitely does not preclude the Chargers from taking a tight end in the draft.
No, but you never know with those IPP players. Maybe he could be one of the success stories. But today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay tuned for the Armada Player of the Week later in the show. It is Fan Mail Friday, but we also got some news on Thursday from the Chargers because according to Jeremy Fowler, UCLA linebacker Carson Schwesinger is taking a pre-draft visit to the Chargers today per source. Schwesinger is garnering buzz due in part to his ability to cover downfield. So, not the position you would think for the Chargers. Not crazy for them to take a linebacker, but specifically this linebacker who, if they were to get him, would probably cost their second round pick, which is 55 overall, which is definitely surprising. And the visit itself doesn't mean a ton as far as, Junior Colson and what it means for this roster as a whole, or even that the Chargers are going to take him. If we know anything, history has told us, just because you get a meeting with the Chargers doesn't mean that they're going to draft you or even necessarily super, interested in your services always. But they also have met with other players that they do end up drafting. So thinking that a meeting is a kind of a death sentence to them drafting that player is also wrong as well. But I do think that if they were to take Carson Schwesinger, a guy that's not one of their, 5, 6, 7 top needs, it makes you wonder a little bit about Junior Colson. I mean, even just the interest, if they are targeting a linebacker in the range of day 2 in the draft, it makes you wonder if they're starting to have doubts about Junior Colson as the long-term option, because you look at it from the surface, David, and you'd say, why would you take a linebacker on day 2, especially in round 2, when you seem to have the future of that position on your roster? A guy that played in Jesse Minter's defense at Michigan and Junior Colson, who they drafted in 2024, who did struggle as a rookie, and Deion Henley, who burst onto the scene as a top 10 linebacker last year. So that is kind of where my mind went when I saw that this meeting was taking place.
Yeah, I mean, how could it not, right? Because obviously Deion Henley had a breakout season. He was fantastic, and so it's not going to be an indictment on him. He's definitely going to be the future of the position because you saw how many different ways he's able to impact the football field. I mean, all the different things that he does at such a very, very high level. And, with Junior Colson, the one thing that we do know is, linebacker is one of the hardest positions to be able to make that jump from college to the pros, right? Like we've seen multiple different examples with the Chargers alone, with it taking 3 or 4 seasons before things really, really click. I mean, there's several examples, Drew Tranquil being one of them, right? Took him a couple of years for him to really find his footing. And so, this is a really, really tough transition, but yeah, I think right now, you look at this and you're like, man, I mean, this kid right here, Carson Schwesinger, he can do a little bit of everything. So if they're trying to bring in this type of player, then what does that mean for Junior Colson and his future?
Yeah, and like I said, it doesn't mean anything right now. If they were to take him, maybe that feels a little different. And I think, as we learned with Kenneth Murray in regards to not just Carson Schwesinger, but also with Junior Colson, is sometimes it never clicks. Right? Yeah. Sometimes it doesn't happen. It's just a hard position overall to transition to. Now, it's fun imagining what Navarro Bowman could do with this guy specifically because of the skill set that he brings. And as a plus coverage defender, which is what Schwesinger is, it would be sweet to see, okay, what could he do in tandem with Deion Henley?
Yeah.
Now, the linebacker position is a lot more than just coverage, but I think the nice thing about Carson Schwesinger is it wasn't really super easy to find obvious holes in his game. I mean, he's a very well-rounded player who filled up the stat sheet in a kind of Deion Henley in college type of way. 136 tackles, 4 sacks, and 2 interceptions with 9 tackles for loss last year. That will do. But I thought the part that did make him special is what Jeremy Fowler brings up there, because I don't know if I've seen a collegiate linebacker, at least in recent memory, that I can remember carrying receiving options down the field as well as this guy does. As far as being able to turn his back, stay in phase with the receiving option he's covering, and be able to make a play down the field. Even at an evolving position, linebacker, there's still plenty of players that you don't want to see them 10 plus yards down the field because they just become useless to an extent. This is not that guy. That's what makes him special. But I do think there's a lot of other parts of the game that still make him a good player, where he's not just a coverage linebacker at the next level.
I mean, honestly, for me, Daniel, and I texted you, 10 minutes after, getting into one of the games, I was like, man, this guy can play. Like, it's very, very apparent that this guy was all over the football field, making his presence felt in multiple different ways. And yeah, obviously he has great speed and shows really good instincts in coverage. Like, he knows where he's supposed to be. He knows, what these kind of routes are, and he does a really good job being able to mirror them. Not just, your short, flat routes and covering your running backs. No, this guy can actually cover down the football field, and he's not out of place. I love his effort level too. I think he runs sideline to sideline. He has that ability to chase ball carriers down. He does a great job of sifting through the traffic and engaging the ball carrier. He finds the hole and he explodes through them and closes those holes to meet the ball carrier. Also shows great tackling form. He wraps up pretty much every single time instead of going for the big hit. He's much more technically sound from that perspective, and I don't mind it whatsoever. And also he showcase some instincts and production as a blitzer as well. So really kind of anything that he was asked to do, he was able to do it and was able to make an impact doing it.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with all of those parts. I mean, sifting through traffic to find the ball was something he did good at. I mean, did a good job of trying to fight off blocks and not just accepting being blocked was something else I saw. And just a great job of scraping the line of scrimmage to be able to find, especially on those wide zone plays, finds where he needs to be in those moments. As far as the cons go, though, any flaws to his game, what did you see?
Yeah, I mean, small sample size, I think, is one of the things that kind of really jumps out at you.
1 year of big production.
1 year of big production. Besides that, it was 84 or less defensive snaps. So that's one thing that kind of sets the alarm bells going just a little bit. He's a little undersized. Obviously, with that ability to be able to run around, he's a little bit light. He's 225 pounds, according to most of the sites out there. And, that's something where you probably need to put on a little bit of weight. And then the other thing is the short arms. That's one of the things that you brought up to me, is that he has shorter arms than Denzel Perriman does. And obviously we know that's an aspect of his game that, it has kind of plagued him a little bit. But I think because he's a much more formed tackler and he doesn't really go for those big hits, it kind of mitigates the issue of having shorter arms. But that's pretty much all I was able to find. Other than that, this is a really good football player.
Yeah, I thought that I was surprised to see the arm length after watching the film, because I didn't see the arm length beforehand. So when I saw it, and I saw it's, sub 32 inches, 31 and 5/8, I was like, it's not like the lineman where it's like, you can't have less than 33-inch arms or it's just not going to work. It's not the same with linebackers. But I would say, as far as just on the field goes, not physically speaking, can get going the wrong way on misdirection plays. As someone that makes some plays in the backfield, he's trying to jump plays. He's trying to get to where he needs to go quickly, and that can backfire on him. And also, to your point, doesn't have the strength to just stonewall offensive linemen in the hole if he has to at times. If a lineman gets him and keeps him, he's going to push him around a little bit, and, he can push him 4 or 5 yards off the line of scrimmage. But he does a pretty good job of this quickness to avoid blocks. But when you only are trying to avoid blocks, what can happen is you open up the cutback lane, which happened to him a couple times, because he's trying to beat a blocker to a spot. If you get there too early, it opens things up on the backside. So I saw a couple of those things in the, 3 games that I watched of him, 3 full all 22 games, and I liked him a lot. I think he definitely has potential to be more than just a coverage linebacker, but I think as far as the coverage goes, That's probably the most special part of his game. Just the instincts, the route recognition, how he is able to keep up with guys down the field, I thought was all super impressive. But
Agreed.
It is Fan Mail Friday, and we want to get into some really good questions, including if the Chargers should even take a linebacker in the first 3 rounds. We're going to talk about that and the other positions the Chargers should probably wait on and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. The Armada Player of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, we're taking a look at our draft prospects to pick one guy that stands apart, the guy we believe showcased the strength and power needed to push the Chargers forward as we look ahead to next season. This week's Armada and clear-cut Player of the Week is Omarion Hampton. And the reason I pick Omarion Hampton is he feels like the Armada to me, because you're talking about someone who can carry a heavy-duty load, someone who is rugged, had played in a pro-style system that showed you he can keep churning and churning out yards, someone who also fits in the Jim Harbaugh type of football philosophy, and someone with the capability and confidence to dominate at the next level. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what I think of when I talk about Omarion Hampton. It's clear that our Player of the Week is out here and ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of their outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. David, it is Fan Mail Friday, and we want to thank all of the everydayers who contributed to today's show and everyone just for being here. But thank you guys, because it is always better when we get to hear what you guys want us to talk about and can have the fans contribute to the show, because that's really what our show was built off of, is getting you guys involved. And we appreciate everyone who, takes the time to check us out, especially in the off season as well. And there's a lot of other stuff going on. But let's pay it back, because we have a lot of great fan mail questions to get into today, including this one from our good friend Chris Saiz, who says, what are some positions the Chargers should stay away from drafting in the first 2 days, with obvious being special teams not included? So I would say special teams not included. I would also say quarterback, right? When you have Justin Herbert, you're almost never going to be taking a quarterback in the top 3 rounds. But if you're looking at where you would go after that, David, what positions would stick out to you?
Yeah, so based off of the depth at both of these positions, in my opinion, I think these are a couple of positions that you can kind of stay away from. Number one is safety. I think they have a lot of bodies, a lot of like really good quality football players, kind of up and down, from the top end to the back end that you really believe in. Derwin James, obviously superstar. Elijah Molden had a fantastic season. Alohi Gilman, I think, is probably the player that's been a little bit more up and down. Tony Jefferson came in when he was on the field. He made an impact. He looked like he belonged in that room. And then the other one for me is corner. I don't necessarily believe that the Chargers need to take a corner, especially, after the success that they were able to have getting Tarheeb Steele and Cam Hart, and then also, bringing in 2 corners in free agency with Dante Jackson and Benjamin St-Juste. So I think those position groups feel pretty good to me at this moment in time. If you want to address those later on, I could see it, but definitely not early in the draft.
Yeah, I would throw linebacker in there as well. I mean, you have the same group you had last year. I think you give your guy Junior Colson a full other year at it,
Definitely.
right? And if it doesn't work out, you could re-sign a Troy Dye, right? Maybe you're not going to bring Denzel Perryman back again, but like Junior Colson didn't start at the beginning of last season either, and part of that's due to injury, potentially. But it was Denzel Perryman that was out there in week 1, and we saw what they were able to do at that position, which was the best linebacker position we've seen from them all together in maybe 10 years.
Time.
So
yeah,
probably at least 10 years. So
yeah.
I'd be surprised if it was linebacker. I mimic your thoughts on safety. Derwin James, Elijah Molden, now you have those guys at least for the next 2 seasons, and Molden for the next 3. You also have, more veteran experience with Alohi Gilman and Tony Jefferson. Now, could you use some youth at that position? Absolutely. I'm just not having it in rounds 1 through 3. That's, a later on day 3 pick if you want to try to get that future guy, because I think you feel pretty good about the room going into this season. The other one I'd be surprised is tackle. Tackle doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Tackle, maybe that's just one of the obvious ones, but I could see them taking a tackle. They need a long-term swing tackle option for them. I'd be surprised if it's in the first 3 rounds. Now, let's get to the We Are the Storm here next from Twitter, who says, with so many spots seemingly needing to be filled out, would it be out of the question to just take best player available when we pick at 22? What do you think?
I don't think that it's out of the question, but it's really ever truly best player available, right? It's more like best
Within
player
reason,
available of what your team needs. That's really more accurate as to what it is. So obviously, no quarterbacks, no tackles, or any special teams players. Like those aren't going to, it's based on what the Chargers are. That's never going to be it. But besides that, I think pretty much every other position other than, the ones that we kind of just mentioned are kind of off the table, at 22. I mean, there is a myriad of different position groups that the Chargers could add premium talent to. And yeah. I would not be mad, whether that's edge, whether that's defensive line, wide receiver, running back, even if the right guy is there, right? There is a lot of different position groups that, you could, really comfortably say, hey, I'm taking the best player available of the positions that we feel like we need to shore up.
Yeah, and I think you're right to an extent where, like, best player available within reason. Like, the best player is a quarterback, you're not going to take a quarterback.
Right.
Like, that's just, it is what it is, right? So I think it is always within reason. I think teams almost always have players in tiers to a certain extent. So if you have two players who have almost identical grades, even if the one player is a little bit higher but comes at an obvious position you don't need, you're going to take the player that was a little bit worse but still feel like you're getting good value at that position. Like, I would be shocked if it were a linebacker, if it were a tackle, if it was a safety in round one. Quarterback, obviously. I think there's basically 6 positions in one wild card. Interior offensive line, guard, and center, I'm counting as one.
Yeah.
Running back, wide receiver, tight end, interior defensive line, and edge rusher.
Yep.
Where I disagree with you is I think cornerback is the wild card, and I think it's almost specifically linked to Will Johnson because it's a former Michigan player that would be worth the spot you're taking him, right?
Sure.
And the reason I say that is because almost no one can say they go best player available no matter what.
That's true.
Joe Ortiz actually comes from an organization that can say it because they drafted Kyle Hamilton, who slid to them. They had Marcus Williams. They had their starting safety set, and they said, this guy is so good on a different tier, right? I'm sure he wasn't close to the other players they had graded at bigger needs, but they took him anyways, and they didn't need him. They were in a similar spot. So, like, a Malachi Starks or something like that. Like, it's not totally out of the question. I don't think it's going to happen. But you are looking at a GM who comes from one of the organizations that can actually say that. And that's one of the things when they hired him. We were like,
it's a good point.
Everyone says it. This guy actually did it, or at least was a part of the team that actually did it, which is why I think that Will Johnson is a potential pick. And, like, yeah, you could lock down all 3 of your corner spots for the foreseeable future. You still have a need at outside corner if you want to put Tarheeb still in the slot long term. And you could say, hey, we have another need outside corner. They went and signed 2 outside corners, which should show you kind of how they feel about it, maybe needing that guy. And it would make sense in that way, but it's still not one of your top 6 needs, so it would still be surprising. But let's get to this one from Lewis Bensman, who says, in the draft, we are essentially rooting for tackles and quarterbacks to be picked in the first 21 picks. Absolutely. Any chance we pick a tackle to play guard like the coach suggested last season and like the Chargers have been doing, not just in this regime, but also well into the Tom Telesco era as well. David, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, obviously, you want as many tackles and quarterbacks to go in front of you as possible, so that pushes up more good players down the board closer to where you pick. It just
positions
enriches the pool of players that you will have access to. Now, the one thing I will say is I have absolutely no interest in taking a player that has to switch positions at the next level with the 22nd overall pick. None whatsoever. So I do not want to see a tackle that has to transition to guard, which is something that is not a sure thing. That is an automatic, he's going to be great. That's just not what I'm looking for. You want to use a reclamation project, then fine. Do it later on in the draft if you want to try to switch someone's position. Not at the top when you need somebody that's ready-made, ready to go, making an impact immediately.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say if you're going to take a guy there, right? I mean, you want him to have played that position in college. That being said, there is a guy that could go around where the Chargers are picking who played left tackle for North Dakota State last season and now is projected to be a center at the next level with Gray Zabel, who has been one of the pre-draft darlings who went and tore it up at the Senior Bowl and answered the biggest question anyone had against him, which was, how will he do against bigger competition? He went out there, he played center after playing left tackle last season at North Dakota State, and he dominated everyone. So Gray Zabel would be that guy. There are plenty of people that think Gray Zabel should be, should be the pick for the Chargers, but think that he will go around that range and will be a first-round pick. So he's probably the exception, more than the rule. But I think you're right. I think that would be a legitimate concerns, and I think you would see that the problem is the Chargers have tried a lot of former tackles to move them inside in recent memory, and none of them have worked out. I mean, and you can only peg one of those two this regime, already, because they haven't had a lot of chances to do it. They just moved Trey Pipkins, who was already a tackle, inside to guard. But Jamari Sawyer, they tried it with, and it didn't work. Trey Pipkins, obviously last year, it didn't work. Brendan Hymus, they tried at guard and then at center after he was a tackle in college. It didn't work. Even, Jordan McFadden had some time at tackle as well in college, and then he's already off the team. So, yeah, I think for the most part, you want somebody that's played that position. Maybe there's a guy that you feel like supersedes that because you're just so sure about it and Gray's able, but don't pretend also that that's not still a risk. Either way, we have more to get into because you guys had a lot of great Fan Mail Friday questions. And you also have a chance to talk about the Chargers' newest tight end from the International Pathway Program, Jordan Petaia. We're going to talk about what his chances are and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. All right, David, well, let's get into more of these fan mail questions that we have. And thank you again to all the everydayers for not just giving us your support today by watching the show and asking your questions, but also for making us your first listen. If you need a second listen, make sure to check out the Locked On NFL Draft, where you have Keith Sanchez and Damian Parson, who will be on the show on Monday as they keep you up to date with all the latest draft news and give you the best players at every position on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts from. David, let's talk about the draft a little bit, at least to a certain extent, because we got this question from Instagram from Odd, who said, with the addition of another tight end, do you think we pass on Colson Loveland? So, no, I don't think so. The guy that you're signing is a huge long shot. So we'll talk about that first. But really, we just wanted to use this question to give us a chance to talk about the Chargers' newest signing, the International Pathway Program. Same thing that CJ Okoye went through when he was a fan favorite over the last couple of years. And now they're getting a rugby player, David, trying to make it work at the NFL level with Jordan Petaia.
Yep, Jordan Petaia here, a native of Melbourne, Australia, a guy who was a rugby phenom, pretty much a superstar. He has appeared in 2 World Cups, 2019 in Japan and 2023 in France, at 18 years old. So this guy was
when he made the first one,
bright at the highest level of his sport that he was playing in at 18 years old. That is incredibly impressive, no matter how you look at it. Now, with that being said, he trained for this IPP program over 10 weeks at IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida, which led to a showcase at the University of South Florida on March 26th, which ultimately led to him getting signed with the Chargers. Now, the International Pathway Program is very different, okay? So when a player gets selected and they get a contract, they do not count against the roster whatsoever. Now, if you don't make him an active member of that 53-man roster, he cannot see the field at all the entire season. So basically, it's an opportunity for him to season, learn the game of football, and see if he can actually make it. Now, are there any examples of anybody really making it from the International Pathway Program? Yeah, there absolutely is. And I think the poster child of that is probably another gentleman from his home country. That would be Jordan Mailata, the left tackle for the world champion Philadelphia Eagles. So there is some kind of experience, and there is some examples out there of players being able to make that transition going from one sport to another.
Yeah, I think according to the internet, which has never lied, I think there's around 20 players from the IPP program that are on NFL rosters right now. So it is a long shot. It isn't someone that drastically changes how you're going to view the draft or even how you feel about the tight end position right now. The one thing I'd say is if they made him, if he makes the team, they have to pay him and all the things like they normally would. He would count as a roster spot. What you're talking about is they have the opportunity to basically keep him as an extra practice squad player this season without that counting against the practice squad maximum. And he wouldn't actually be allowed to come up and be activated from the practice squad at any point this year, but it would let them, keep him around for a little while. I talked about CJ Okoye, who was a fan favorite, got a sack in his first ever organized football game a couple of preseasons ago. And he was a great story who continues to be a great story because he signed a future reserve contract with the Ravens, I'm sure off of the, commendament of John Harbaugh's brother, who's currently the
I'm
Chargers
sure.
head coach. But yeah, I mean, not only can you make it from the IPP program, I'd say the other part of this is he's coming from a professional sport. He's coming from doing another sport at the highest level, which already puts him in a different kind of boat.
That
than
also has
CJ
some
Okoye.
similarities to American football too.
It has a lot of similarities to American football. Rugby does, especially from a physicality standpoint and athleticism standpoint to a certain extent. And there's only probably certain positions you would try this out for, right? There's been other fullbacks and guys like that have made it from other sports. But Jordan Mailata, not just a Super Bowl champion, a dude who was second team All-Pro and was the top PFF graded offensive tackle in 2024. He was the best left tackle in the league, according to them last year. So it can work out. It doesn't change how you view anything or put this roster together this season. But I wouldn't totally write it off. Who knows what can happen with Jordan Petaia, even if it is a huge long shot, as we were going to say right now going into it. But
sure,
let's get to this last one, or this next one here from Jeremiah619 on Instagram, who says, could this roster right now beat last year's Texans roster? David, this is a juicy one. What do you think?
It is. And I think when you're looking at this question, you have to evaluate what were the reasons why the Chargers lost to the Texans, right? Weak interior offensive line. Did they fix that? Partially, yeah, when they brought in Mekhi Becton and Andre James. Lack of weapons. Now you got Mike Williams and you have Tyler Conklin. Instead of throwing across your body and across the field to Quentin Johnston, who doesn't have the same skill set to go up and get the football, or at least not allow the defender to steal it from you, now you're throwing that to Mike Williams, which we've already seen him do that exact same play and have those type of have success in those situations. And then also with Tyler Conklin, who has very short hands, instead of throwing it to Will Dissly and having those balls go off his hands and turn into interceptions, more than likely, according to the trends and statistics of Tyler Conklin's career, he's not dropping those passes. So with that being said, I think, yes, this current version of the Chargers team could beat the Texans from last season.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because, like, the thing is, too, the reason it's so hard to judge that game is it's the only game Justin Herbert's ever thrown more than 2 interceptions. So, like, he had a 4 interception game. Now, would he have had that if he had better protection? Probably not. But there was also just some certain weird things, right? You have a high throw that goes through the hands of Ladd McConkey. Obviously, you have the one drop by Will Dissly on, 2nd and 19, something like that, where could have had a first down, and then you have the pick 6 that goes off of Will Dissly's hands as well. And also, Josh Palmer didn't play in that game. That's another important thing to remember. So you'd add Mike Williams, but you already didn't have Joshua Palmer. So I do think, also Najee Harris might get you some tough yards in that game that you needed against a stout front. So I would be really iffy, but I think by the end of the draft, because I still think that the Texans would still bring some of the same problems to the Chargers as they did in that game. I think the other part of it is defensively, you lost Poona Ford, you lost Joey Bosa, both guys who were good in that game. In that game, you also lost Cam Hart as well. So it's just hard to say these hypotheticals always, but I think the Chargers would have been a lot closer to having a real playoff roster than they were at that time last year. But there's one more that we want to get into here with Athir, who has a great question about who the Chargers could open up against in their real home opener at SoFi Stadium.
Daniel, David, I have a question. Who do you want to see for the Chargers home opener? Not counting Brazil before the schedule come out. Who do you want? I want the smoke. I want the fire. Give me the Super Bowl champs. Give me the Eagles, baby. Let's go.
I love you, Athir. Also, I don't want the smoke. You can keep the Eagles away from me in the Chargers home opener. I think getting off to good starts of seasons is what I want the most for the most part, David. But who would you go with for this question?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind playing the Eagles earlier on in the season before they get into the rhythm and get into the flow of the season. I think that's a part of it. But honestly, I definitely want the smoke, but it's with a different team. It's with the Houston Texans. I want to beat the brakes off of them after what they did in the playoffs. Yeah, I'm a little spiteful, but that's who I am. So bring on the Texans. You got a whooping coming your way.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think, also if they wanted to do it against Jaden Daniels or someone and have that kind of showcase, that could be a lot of fun. Definitely. I think the Texans are my number one choice here. They will be a different team they have some weird stuff going on with their offensive line where they replaced some bad offensive linemen and at least one really good offensive lineman with Laramie Tunsil with other guys who have been pretty bad. We'll see what that ends up looking like, but it's some strange things going on there. And I think that it would just also, even if it's a different Texans team, I think they would still bring some of the same problems like I just talked about, in this last question, because I think they're still going to have Derek Stingley, who's coming off a $30 million contract. They're going to have some guys that they didn't have in that last game, like Jalen Petrie, who's also going to be available more than likely when you go play them this time. I don't know. I think it would be a great barometer, though. I think the other answer I would go with here, give me the Vikings. Give me the Vikings early, especially if they're starting J.J. McCarthy.
Yeah.
I want to get them before, I want him to see deer in the headlights before he's gotten to see a lot of NFL defenses. Look what Jesse Minter has here for you, buddy. And he's not
going to be taking it easy on you. This ain't practice at Michigan anymore.
Sure. I mean, obviously he would have some experience going against Jesse Minter's defense, but the NFL is at a different speed, and I think it would be beneficial if you're going to get a team who had 14 wins last season, get them early with their new quarterback, because I'll tell you, Kevin O'Connell is a hell of a coach, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if J.J. McCarthy is pretty good in his first season because of that, like Sam Darnold having a career year last year and Kirk Cousins before that.
Yeah.
Give me them early. Before they've caught their stride. I think Eagles saying, I think they started 2-2 last year before they went on kind of the torrid run they did. So I think those aren't bad answers at all. I'm staying away from the Eagles and an early loss potentially going up against the Super Bowl champions, who were obviously the most talented team, and you feel like they're still going to be this year. But I love that Ethia always wants to smoke, and I love to think about, who that is going to be and what the Chargers are going to do this year for their schedule release. I don't know if you can go anime round 3. I'm not sure, but that is going to wrap things up for this week, guys. Thank you to everyone who tuned in, all of the everydayers out there, especially for making us your first listen. To make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from, especially so you don't miss Monday's show, where you could get a mock draft from us, some nobodies, or you could get it from a draft expert like Damian Parson himself. So I'm excited to have him on Monday for our mock draft Monday, to get on to who the Chargers should be targeting, not just in round 1, but throughout the draft and what positions they should be targeting where. So make sure you guys are back there, and you can do that also by following us on all of our social media at Locked On LAC on Twitter, at Locked On Chargers on Instagram, and on our Locked On Chargers Facebook page as well, where we post the show every day. And if you guys want to be like Ethia and get in on the voicemail game, you can call in at 323-524-7924 and give us your 30-second question or buy or sell. Thank you guys, as always, for making us your first listen and for being here every day with us. We'll be back with you guys on Monday for Mock Draft Monday with Damian Parson. But until then, take it easy and go Bulls.